We have one. Now it is 2 o'clock. Welcome to Go to 10. We're here now in the, I heard from Steven, in Swedish it's called Gradängen, but Steven, who's sitting here live, told me to call it the Little Arena in English. So welcome online participants and physical participants to Go to 10's Little Arena, where we will have a presentation today from Karsten Deppert about the future of work. Just want to say a few words about Go to 10. We are a meeting place for where ideas and projects on or about the internet can grow. It is a free meeting place, so if you have a project that you want to work on, feel free to come here and work from here. If you have something that you want to share, some knowledge, something about the internet or a project that you're doing, feel free to book this little arena and share your projects here and wisdom. And now I want to leave the word over to Karsten.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here. So my name is Karsten. I'm involved in a lot of different companies in different ways. And one of the things I work mostly with is actually Mindpark, which is located here as well upstairs and in other places. And I'm going to talk to you about the future of work and what that means. And this basically draws on my experience from being involved in so many different companies, and also because being involved in co-working, you get a lot of questions like, okay, how will this be in the future? How will this be affected? And stuff like that. So I'm kind of trying to condense that into certain trends and say like, okay, this is how I perceive the future will be when it comes to work. Does that sound interesting? Interesting enough. Okay, good. So to understand the future of work, we need to first understand that there are 4 types of work. And this is something we quite easily forget, because when we think about work, we usually think about our own type of working, because everybody works the same type as we do. But of course, they don't. So what does these 4 types of work mean? Okay, so the first one is that is on-site, which means services and industry. These are working environments where you need to be physically. Like it's a cafe or it's a production line somewhere. You need to be there. If you're not there, work stops. You cannot do it remotely. And quite a lot of work is actually still in this category, but we don't really perceive it because it's kind of invisible to us, because we're usually not that much at a factory, and we don't think about people working in a cafe actually work there. We just buy coffee and then we're happy. But this is, a lot of workplaces are actually like this. They're on site and they need to be there, otherwise there is no work. Okay. Another category is remote working. Remote working is something which has existed for the last 20 years, and the last 10 years it's been growing. Remote working is when you're kind of very decentralized. You don't really have one head office where everybody sits, but everybody's kind of spread out around the world. One of my own companies is working with a lot of freelancers and remote workers, for example. We have a couple of hundred people working around the globe. So it's been possible thanks to the internet for a long time, and it has been catching on more and more. Remote work is very different from office work. It requires totally different routines, totally different structures, and those kind of things. So it's very, very challenging in that sense. And then we have, but it's something which has already existed, and it's something which will continue to exist. And then we have office work. And office work, I will divide into 2 categories. Office work is type 1, high trust, and then we have type 2, low trust. Okay. And these are very different and will have a different future depending on how this is. So if we talk about the future and how it will be, what we will see is that, okay, on the first category, on-site, there will be kind of no real difference. Like, production will still be production, service industry will still be service industry. There will be a continuous trend of automatization. Like, okay, we will try to automate more and more of this. Car factories will become more automative. Even the service industry will try to automate more. We will have check-in desks instead of check-in persons and stuff like that. So it will try to automate, but it cannot automate like totally, because what we actually like is the human interaction when it comes to the service industry, and when it comes to production, it's hard because there are always steps which need some kind of handling or something like that, and at least you need some kind of back end where you can actually handle the machines and stuff like that. So it will never disappear completely. It will always be something there, but it will probably change how it is. However, because we like the human interactions, it's hard to think that it will disappear completely. It will probably go somewhere else. So say that a hotel is more automated in the future. You have fewer clerks, you have more automated check-in and stuff like that. But you will still have people working in the hospitality industry, but then there might be something else instead. There might be tour guides, or like they will probably just change because we human like other humans. So living in a world where we don't interact with other humans would feel like a very sterile world. So we will always create new jobs that will be filled by other humans just because we like those interactions. And then once they become a bigger industry, they'll be kind of automated, and then we'll find something new and do the same again. So we'll always have some kind of hospitality industry in one way or another. So that's something to stay even in the long term. And this is important because especially the service industry and hospitality industry, you have a lot of low-skilled workforces. So it's an easy way for people to get into the labor market. In the normal industry, it's harder nowadays. It requires more and more skill, more and more specializations, because it becomes more and more automated in that sense. But okay, so those are here and will continue to be here, the on-site working. Remote working, what will happen there? We already have it, so it will definitely not disappear. It will probably grow. The thing with remote work is that it's super hard to switch from these to remote working, because it requires a totally different setup. If you're going to switch from a normal office and go to only remote, you suddenly need new ways of holding your meetings. You need new ways of onboarding your employees. You need new ways of recruitment in general. Like all those kind of things. Like you need new routines you didn't know you needed. And you have old routines you don't need anymore. So it's like a hard cultural shift within a company. So it's very hard to do. We will now in the next year see a lot of companies try to do it, and a lot of companies will fail with that, because it's just a super hard thing to change, because what you really need to change is the culture of the company, and everybody knows that changing a culture of the company is a long-term hard project. It can be done, but it's definitely not something which can be done easily. However, what we will see is a lot of new companies emerging which will start remote first. They will start by just being one person here in Malmö and another person somewhere else in Sweden or in Australia or Thailand or South Africa or wherever. And that will become something which is growing more and more. That if I start a new company, why do I actually need an office? I like to work remotely. I like to be able to travel when I work. Okay, why can't everybody in my company be that kind of person and do that? And what COVID-19 has done is that it actually accelerated the tools for these. The tools have always been there, but now a lot of more people have used those tools and experienced those tools. And now it's a lot easier for people to accept that, okay, wait, it's actually possible to work remotely. I have some limited experience of it, so I can quit my office job and actually start to work remotely if I want to. So we will see a growth in this, but this will be mostly in new companies emerging. And you can build big companies with remote only. You can have hundreds of employees with remote structures. It's definitely possible. The thing is, this is not really so known yet, because the companies which have existed so far, which have been remote, they've been kind of invisible, because the companies that are visible are often companies which have big offices. Like if you're a company which is important, you have your own HQ building somewhere. Like, yeah, but if you're this kind of company, you don't have an HQ anywhere. So like this company, they can be rather big companies, but they're just invisible except for maybe the customers. But like for the general public, they're invisible because why do you even need to know about them? There's no interest in needing to know about them. Well, other companies, when they grow, they just become visibly locally at least. So like locally people will know, okay, this company apparently is big because they have a big freaking office. Okay, then it's a big company. So they've been invisible for a while. Do you have a question? Wait, if you have a question, you need to have this one.
Then do you have an example of
remote company? I mean, here in Malmö, the easiest example is Mapillary. You're just acquired by Facebook. There were 50 employees, remote. Entire team were remote. I think there were 10 people here in Skåne, but they even had rules that they were not allowed to meet physically, like before COVID-19. Like if you had a meeting, it needed to be all remote, but now that people understand why, but they understood that before COVID-19. Like, yeah, you can't have a meeting where it's like, okay, those 5 who actually are at an office have a meeting, because if they do, they mess up the remote structure. So if you're remote, you need to be remote. And that's kind of the things what I mean. This, like, it's hard to understand how different such a company needs to function versus how a normal company functions. And that's why it's so easy for employees in an office to just say like, but this part we're actually here physically, so now we behave just as normal before. Yeah, but you can't do that if you're a remote company, because you need to think that whatever we do needs to be global directly in that sense. So that's just one company, but there's lots of them, but they're very unknown.
And I can fill in that Mapillary tomorrow will actually have a presentation here, or Sandra from Mapillary, about how to make remote work.
Yes. And they have experience of remote work and making it work. So yeah. So that's remote working. So then we have the office type 1, high trust. And I divide these into high trust and low trust, and I'll talk about that now. Like, what do I mean with high trust and low trust? So high trust means that you have a corporate culture or a company culture, which is that you trust your employees. You have recruited good people and you trust them to do a good job. Okay. And low trust is the same thing, but the opposite. You have recruited employees, but you don't really trust them. You feel that you need to measure them. You feel that you need to tell them what to do. Like, you need to have strict KPIs and a lot of follow-ups and things like that. High trust office type, both of them have been offices. So high trust office type, what will happen now is that they will become more remote, but not completely remote. So a high trust office, for example, they have already had flexible working hours. So they already, like, if you show up at 7 or at 8 or at 9, they don't really care. But be at the office before 9:30 or 10, that's good. And don't leave before 3, stuff like that. They will probably now have as well, like, yeah, you can work from home 2 days a week or something like that. So like they will become more flexible in that sense. And that will be highly appreciated by all employees. Some will use it, some won't use it. I'm assuming, I haven't really seen this yet, but I'm assuming that a lot of those companies will also turn into, just as the days, like, okay, you shouldn't be here after 9:30 and you shouldn't leave before 3, probably will be the same with the weekdays. Okay, but you should be at the office on Tuesday and Wednesdays, because that's when we will have our internal meetings. So that's good when you're there. But the other days, you can be wherever you want to. Most likely, they will end up somewhere like that, instead of like having that freedom each day for all employees, because then suddenly having a meeting becomes a hassle. So they'll probably have like limit some certain days you should be at the office, and the other days you're very free. And then if it's 2 days at the office or 3 days at the office, that's different. Maybe only 1 day at the office, but they will not be 0 days at the office, because that will be too hard for them. They will feel like if we have 0 days at the office, they might experiment with it. So a lot of companies who experiment with this, they might go back here to this category afterwards. Yeah, 0 days at the office didn't work for us. We need to be at least 1 day at the office. That's probably where they will end up, 1, 2, 3 days at the office, but a high flexibility. And in Sweden, this will be a lot of companies, because in Sweden, the work culture generally is quite high trust. So a lot of companies in Sweden will be here at this type, and we have a higher flexibility in the future. And then if it's Monday and Fridays at the office or Monday and Friday at home, that will probably depend on from company to company, what kind of routines they are. And in 5 years, there will probably be some kind of like standard. They'll probably, okay, these days are recommended to be at the office. But the next couple of years, it'll be a little bit, everybody will try something, and then it'll take a while before that becomes standardized. Office type number 2, low trust. Okay, so these are offices where the trust isn't that high, and these will have a really tough time doing remote things at all. Because if you don't have trust, you can't do remote. Because remote is about measuring, not even measuring, like kind of assuming people will do something good, something beneficial. Measuring if you can, but you can't always measure that, because a lot of tasks are very hard to measure if it's good or not. So if you have low trust, you need to have people in front of you, more or less, to see that they're actually working. Because if they're not working, they are not productive. And this we will probably see to continue to exist, and they will go back to how it was before COVID-19. Like, as soon as they can, they'll go back to normal, because that's the only way that type of company can function. They cannot function if they are too spread out. They cannot function if they are too flexible. And the interesting thing is here, this can actually be mixed. So what can happen is that this can be mixed because it can be department as well. It doesn't need to be the entire office. It can be one department has a high trust leadership, and they can be quite flexible, quite remote. And for example, the sales office, nobody trusts the salespeople. If they don't show up, then they won't sell anything. So they might be low trust in the same company. So that will probably happen. However, I think in the long term, what we will see is that we will see a divide between those two. And then they can definitely be on a company level. And they can definitely be in the same field. They can be, like, both can be software developers, for example. And one is high trust, one is low trust. And they will, after a while, actually split in those directions, because people who are happy to work in a high trust environment, they will quit their job here sooner or later and move to this type of company. And at the same time, people who are here, some people aren't made for high trust. They're unproductive. Like, they need somebody to actually tell them what to do. Otherwise, they don't become productive. They will switch to these because they will be much more productive here. So you will actually have like a split in these two type of companies after a while. And the toughest part now will be in the next 1-2 years when they're still mixed. Because now, if you're a manager in this type of environment, you will have 5 employees who don't fit there very well. And it will be quite hard to manage them, because they just don't fit in with the culture and the culture you want to build. And the same here. If you have a low trust and you force your employees to be there, and you have 5 employees who just don't want to be in the office, and they don't understand why do they need to be in the office, it'll be a pain in the ass to have those 5 employees. So the next couple of years will be really hard here before this split has happened, because it will take time. It doesn't happen too gradually. People need to switch jobs for that to happen and identify where to be. And the reason why I think on an office level, or not on an office level, on a company level, that this actually split will be, is because some, like the board or the CEO, they must believe in one of these 2 ways. They must believe that either this is the right way or this is the right way. And if they believe in one of these, then the entire company will move in that direction after a while. Because they might have managers who are of a different type, but that manager will not last forever. And when that manager disappears, they will get in another manager, and that manager will probably be of the type that they think is the right one. So, like, in 10 years' time, companies will have probably split. Initially, it might be much more on a department level, like different departments at different styles. But after a while, this will probably be on a company level, just because it's so much easier if you're a manager in an environment where you work, instead of being a manager in an environment where you don't really think you're doing the right type of work. Okay, but another thing which, so as I mentioned before, I've been quite a lot in co-working as well. And co-working is also something which a lot of people talk about. Is co-working part of the future of the office in one way or another? And I can talk a little bit about that, I thought, because that can be interesting points. So, first thing, we did actually a survey when COVID-19 came. So this is back in May. We did a survey about co-working spaces in Sweden, just to check, okay, how is it in co-working spaces during a pandemic? So we did a survey with 25 different co-working spaces all over Sweden. Interesting things from that, everybody reported there were less co-workers there. Isn't really, that's a huge revelation, but still, so everybody reported that at least 50% or less co-workers there. Everybody report also some kind of drop in revenue. So everybody reported, okay, it's not as good as before. It's worse during the pandemic. A quarter actually said that the pandemic affected their plans for the future, but it was mixed. Some said, now we will accelerate, and some said, no, we will actually not accelerate. So it's a mixture of what people, what lessons they drew from it. And that's the general conclusion from all of this. So when you looked at the data, you couldn't really see anything super clear. So for example, co-working spaces in Stockholm. Some co-working spaces in Stockholm had the most drops in number of people there, and some were the least affected. So apparently this has nothing to do if you're in Stockholm or not. It's the same, like some co-working spaces which are very mixed, and some which are very niche towards a certain trend. Some had a really high drop in a number of companies there, and some weren't affected at all. So there's there's no broad trend at all, and the best assumptions we could do is that it actually is very much relying on like details, like what kind of companies are at your office, for example. Like is a lot of freelancers? Okay, if you had a lot of freelancers, you might have seen a big drop, because freelancers very quickly can decide, I don't need an office, I can work from home. But if you had a lot of teams, then it maybe that didn't happen, because if you had a lot of teams, then they can't just decide too quickly to not have an office. They can decide we don't work from the office, but making the decision to actually not having an office is a bigger decision. So things like that. So it's very different. It's definitely clear that it's more complicated than we thought. Like we assumed it would be kind of easy to see how it would be, but it was really, really hard to see any big conclusions. Okay, but co-working has one thing which others don't have, and that is that we actually have experience of the future of work since before. How come? Because we've seen this before. Because what is a freelancer? A freelancer is actually somebody who works in a high trust organization, more or less. That's actually like the same. Or somebody who works in a remote organization. That's also the same. So from a freelancer perspective. So what that means is that we have already seen for a long time why are people actually at the office? Because a freelancer doesn't need an office. It's voluntarily to actually go to the office if you're a freelancer. And apparently enough freelancers want to go to the office, so that there is a need for things like co-working spaces even before the pandemic. So the interesting thing here is that you can see that, okay, some people have no problem working from home. No problem at all. And those freelancers do work from home. And some freelancers have problem working from home. And this kind of tells us a little bit already, okay, so how will it be in the future? And it's very clear that this actually depends on both who you are as a person and the stage you are in your life. So if you, for example, are a parent to really small kids, you have a big trouble working from home. It's super hard to work from home in that sense. You really want to have an office. If you're a parent to older kids, it's actually quite easy to work from home. So it's those kind of things. And some people are more than a personality trait. Like they can't work from home because all they do is they do the laundry and they do the dishes and this house is super clean, but they don't get any work done. So they can't work from home. But others have no problem at all working from home. They really enjoy it. They're flexible. They can eat breakfast whenever they want. They can work in their pajama all day. All those kind of things. So this is really on a like personal level in two kinds, both at the stage of life and the type of person. So it's hard to actually say in advance, like, okay, if you only hire these kind of people, you will be fine with everybody working from home. No, even if you hire certain kind of people, you will still have phases where you actually need an office versus not needing an office. And this is also something which is a thing which people have realized through the pandemic, is that there's a difference between working from home and working not from the office. So it's one thing to not have an office or not be at the office, but it's another thing to work from home. And currently we use the term work from home for everything which is not in the office. But I definitely think we will see a new type of emerging. We've already seen it. People working from cafes, spaces like here, Go to 10, and stuff like that. Like it's definitely possible to work from other places, which isn't the office, but you're still not home. And this really emphasizes that people aren't meant to work from home. That doesn't fit for everybody. Only fits for a certain type of people. What we also see is that existing companies go for less fixed costs. So this is really a trend. And this is, of course, super accelerated right now because Corona and everything makes high uncertainty. Everybody's like, okay, how much office space do we need in the future? We don't know. So currently, people are willing to pay more to have more flexibility. So nobody wants to sign a new 3 or 5 years lease for the company right now, because there will be like, we don't really know how much space we actually need in 1 year's time. So everybody's kind of like, okay, we are able to pay a little bit more if you have higher flexibility. That's very important. And then also something which we've already seen is that even all remote companies actually need offices. And that's something where co-working spaces also will have a role, because even those who are all remote and who don't have their own offices, all their employees still need somewhere to work. And 50% of the employees will be able to work from home and 50% won't. So we definitely see this happening as well, that people actually get paid higher salary because then they can afford a co-working space. Then they can choose whatever co-working space in their vicinity, or they can rent a desk at a friend's office or something like that. But a lot of there will still be a need for an office in some way or another. And what also comes with an office is there'll also be a need for meeting rooms, like because you will still have physical meetings, even if you don't like have a focus of that. You still need to meet other people every now and then. So having meeting rooms is also one of the things which will become important, or just good Skype rooms and stuff like that, so they can sit for yourself and have Zoom meetings. So yeah, so these are trends that we have seen from co-working already, and which I think is just showing that this will continue to be in this way. Okay, so yeah, relating these things to these 4 types of work. So co-working will have no effect for on-site. That's irrelevant, because on-site work will be wherever that work needs to be done. Remote will have use of co-working in that sense, not for everything, but for a certain percentage of their workforce, definitely. Office type 1 will probably see more people having these kind of not working from home, not working from the office, but not working from home either kind of things. What will happen is also that I think co-working will take a role in trying to minimize like how much people commute. So for example, if you're the type of person who can't work from home, but you work in a high trust office type, so you can actually work from home 2 days a week, then you might actually sit at your local co-working space or cafe or something like that those 2 days, because you don't want to commute into work, because half of the people aren't anyway at the office. I don't need to be at the office, but I just can't be at home. So that's also something which we will see appear. And if you're in a low trust office type, you will have very little use of the flexibility which co-working offers in that sense, because it just doesn't fit you. You want to have your own office. You want to have control over your facilities and stuff like that. So that's how it will work. Cool. That's that. So with that, my presentation is over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karsten. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. Is it proven that after the pandemic or not during the pandemic that working from home is more efficient or less efficient? Like for instance, I have a friend in customer support, and during a few months they were working from home, and their rate was very, very bad, down a lot, like not good at all.
I think there's been studies in all directions. Like there's been studies which say that remote work is super efficient. There's been studies which say remote work is super inefficient. Meta studies have concluded it probably is a little bit more efficient. But I think that's the meta studies aren't really relevant, because it totally depends on your working culture and indirectly on your tasks. So what is it that you need to do, and how is the culture at work? I definitely think you can have really high productive remote work. No question about that. You can be really, really high productive. And also you can hire a lot more people than you usually could if you're all remote, for example. So one of the big benefits which companies which have been all remote already have used for a long time is that you can hire much more competent people than if you are actually at a certain city, because you're limited to that city's workforce or people who are willing to move to that city. So all remote can be super efficient, but you need to do it the right way. And switching from the old way to the new way, in that sense, super hard. So I would say for a lot of people it will be inefficient, but that's because they're doing it the wrong way.
And have the need for freelancers has it been bigger or like been the same as before?
That's hard to say. I would say freelancers currently are the problem now is that you have 2 effects. One is this switch in digitalization, which happens because of the pandemic, and the other is that you have a pandemic. So it's hard to say, like, okay, what effect is because of just how people behave right now and how the economy is right now and stuff like that, and the other is of how will it be in the future. I definitely think there will be the more remote companies there are, the easier it will be for freelancers, because they fit into that culture much simpler, because they're semi-remote or all remote already in that sense. So that actually makes it easier for freelancers in the long run. Is the more companies who are remote, but yeah, we'll need to see.
Interesting.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Karsten. Do we have any more questions? No. Thank you so much, Karsten. Give him a warm round of applause.